Toyota and Lexus shocks usually cost $50, $60, maybe $80, I mean, worst case scenario, $100. But in the case of this GX460, they cost $800 each. They're probably one of the most expensive shocks, not struts, not air struts, shocks. And to kind of give you the difference between the two, I want to show you a shock. This is a shock. You notice the spring is not on it. The spring is somewhere else. That is a shock. Now, this shock is, for lack of a better word, a normal shock, except you notice this little wire that comes out of it. This is an adjustable shock, so it can adjust the kind of the firmness. Is it too firm, comfort, normal? And that's what makes this shock $800. It just pains my heart when I say it. $800 almost, $792 to be exact. With tax, it's over $800. I don't know why they cost this much, but they do. The good news is they're not super common to go, but in the case of this GX, they're a little rotten, and they're making like a kind of a knocking noise as you go over light bumps. And this particular GX460 happens to belong to our dear cameraman Jose. And he's had a little off-roading accident in the past. I'll leave that video right here if you want to check it out. And then the shocks started making noise. And earlier before that, we replaced the front struts. And now we just discovered that there's one more thing with the car. We'll look at it toward the end of the video. But today we want to replace the very expensive shocks. So the Christmas in Jose's family haul today consists of rear shocks for the family car, because these things are expensive. Why are they $800? I don't know, but maybe because of this little piece of wire. It doesn't really do it. I own a GX. These adaptable things don't really do magic. They make a little bit of a difference, but not magic. So if you have a GX460 and you think your rear shocks are starting to go, start saving up, because they're very expensive. Let's go replace them on this truck and you'll see what's involved. They're actually not extremely difficult, but there's one thing that makes them a little bit difficult, and we'll talk about it. So Toyota shocks will have usually a nut at the top, bolt at the bottom, sometimes nut at the bottom, sometimes bolt at the top, bolt at the bottom, but they're pretty much all the same. Even in non-trucks, like if you go something like an RX 350, the shock is here, the spring is here. In this case, we have an air spring, but in case the cars have spring, spring's actually pushing here, and this is what's holding it when you go up in the air. You notice this one, the shield, have seen better days. It's just crumpling. That's not a reason to replace it. It's actually making noise, and that's the reason we're replacing it. Let us go through and replace this one. The first thing we want to do is support the rear end. In this case, I'm using a jack here, like a screw jack. We're just going to support it. We don't want to push it up, but we're just going to support it enough so when we take our shock, the rear end won't drop, then our shock won't reach. I'm going to disconnect this $800 connector right here, and then we have 117 on the top, 117 on the bottom. If you're doing this DIY, this will give you a hard time. In certain trucks, you notice here they made this nice cutout to give you a little bit more room. Most trucks don't have that, so you're just supposed to magically get to this, and usually the whole thing starts spinning. And I say usually, this one is probably going to start spinning. So let's see if we're gonna, if you break this loose and it starts going, we're in good shape. See what's happening there? Oh, we got lucky. If this doesn't want to happen, you're replacing the shock and this comes with it. Just grab this with a vice grip or channel locks to help you hold it. A really good wrench that works for these, especially the ones that don't have this cutout, is this long wrench with a flex head. You can get in like this and get it. That's the best way we found to do this. Now this one is really cooperating. One thing I will warn you, in case you need to use heat, remember that the fuel tank is right here. And in your other cars, it probably is somewhere in this vicinity. So don't go heating this up if you don't need to. I see this a lot. Folks usually get carried away with heat. Heat is the last resort. I'm gonna get the bottom bolt loose as well. This one usually comes right out. Heat is your last resort for things. People always, that's their first resort. You don't want to burn stuff up. I've seen all kinds of burning cars because of torches and people kind of getting carried away with it. Don't. See, now we're getting to a point where it might start spinning on us. Let's see. There it is. Do you see that jump and the whole car is shook? That's why you want the jack stand here. Otherwise, the air suspension will just push it. And that's what you do not want. We didn't say this at the beginning of the video. You have to turn off this air suspension. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to. This will just pump up, pump down while you're up in the air. It makes a very dangerous situation. Whenever you lift one of these air suspension cars, you have to get your air suspension in the off mode. Here's a little demonstration of that. Very simple on the GX, for example. You can get that top mount out. This is getting replaced. Always replace these. Sometimes they don't come with the shock. Let's see if we can. There we go. That was not bad, Jose. That was not bad. Here's the very expensive shock. It's all gone here. This is another mount. This one is actually completely seized on. Look at the amount of rust on this stem. It just looks very ugly. And shock wise, yeah, it's here it makes all kinds of noises. Usually when shocks do this, and this one is returning, but if I can push it by hand this easy, I'm not really pushing a lot of pressure. Usually this shock is on its way out. See, it gets tight, then it starts to loosen. That's what you don't want in shocks. And it says here KYB right in between the rust. Here's something about shocks. Let's have a little talk about this because I hear this all the time in the shop. See, folks will assume that just because this shock, it's very expensive shock, is made by KYB, you could just go to KYB, buy their own branded one, put it in the car, and it's exactly the same. Folks, that is not the case. Sometimes it is, but with shocks and struts, it is not the case. And let me explain before you jump on the comment and say that is not correct. The manufacturer of the part, of the original part, is KYB, but they actually manufactured this part to Toyota specifications, specific requirements that Toyota wanted to go in this shock, and that company made that shock. But when you go buy their own line of shocks, like in the case of KYB, I think they have XLG. Nothing wrong with them. I actually think they are one of the better aftermarket shocks. But it's not going to be 100% the same as original because that is their own specification of that shock. Doesn't mean it's bad, but you're not getting the exact same thing as original. That is never the case because the only company that I think gets you exactly the same part is stuff like Denso, like spark plugs, alternators. You're going to get exactly the same part. ASIN, same thing. If you get original ASIN or original Denso, it's going to be the same. But shocks, it's never the case because basically if KYB were to manufacture this same shock, it won't be 800 bucks. It'll be just a little bit less because Toyota required all these things that normally they don't do in their shocks. That's why Toyota shocks and struts last a very long time. They're just overbuilt. They're always overbuilt. And when they started cheaping out with them, they started not to last and actually went back to them. They're very expensive, especially on the Lexus side. They're just unbelievable how expensive they are, and that's why, because they last. Now, this truck's 2014 with 130 something thousand miles. Yes, I would have expected them to last a little bit longer, but other manufacturers, you won't even make it to 100,000 with some of the original shocks because they're just not good quality. Aftermarket sometimes is better. Not the case with Toyota and Lexus, folks. So now you know that. Just because you read KYB on the original shock doesn't mean that the one you go buy from KYB is exactly the same. Not because KYB doesn't make it. No, because that's Toyota specification that they requested of KYB, not their own domestic, like kind of their own product line. With that, let us go put the new shock in and see how this thing goes. So here's the new shock, and there's something about this shock. You see how it's very short? That's actually how they come, and that's another requirement that Toyota wanted from KYB. So these shocks are locked, and the reason for this is they wanted to make the box very small. They don't want to make it huge because the shock is very tall. So when you get it, you're actually gonna turn it, and the shock will extend out, because it will be very difficult for you to push this all the way in. And imagine how big the box needs to be. So they made this for obvious reasons. It's actually a good idea. But here's what we need to do to this shock. First, and this is just making that noise. Here's the mount. You notice there's a slot here. This needs to go onto the shock, and not like this, like this. Because this is actually the part that's going to lock it in a little tab here. So when you tighten it, it won't turn. This will hold it. So we're going to go through here. Make sure we line up our tab. Just lined up right there. Install it. Oop, I already got it in the wrong orientation. See how the cable actually has to go on that side. So what we're going to do here, we're going to flip our mount. We're going to turn it. There we go. And the bell keeps going. Sounds like a bell. It's Christmas time we're filming this video. I guess it's very appropriate. So it doesn't want to go in at the bottom. I'm going to raise up the axle a little bit. And it still doesn't want to go. It's going to fight us. This is tough. So it's almost there. I feel like we should lift this up a little bit more. I think that is close enough. Here's the other bushing. Push this down, and hopefully, there we go. Now this is a little bit of the tough part, and I dropped the nut. Let's get a magnet. Get this. Because the bushings are new and they're not compressed, they actually barely have enough thread to get on it. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. Start it, I think. Nope. I think I got it started. Tighten it, see what happens. Before I continue, I'm going to put my bolt at the bottom in case this wants to pop out. Now, as I'm tightening this, I'm looking here, making sure that that tab is still engaged, which it is, so we're good. There we go. That's much better. So, a good trick on this, because feel free to experiment and get a torque wrench in here, but you'll never get a really accurate torque reading. But a good way to get this is, once you bottom it out, is count the threads. So I checked the other side. We have like 3 threads exposed, and that's how you know you got it to the same point that it was. Once you get to that point, you give it one last good snug, and we're good to go. And it kind of locks, it won't want to go anymore. We're going to tighten the bottom one. So otherwise you have to get a cross foot, and then you'll never really get an accurate torque, because the way they assembled these at the factory is they assemble them without the body on, so they can really get their torque reading proper. Here, yeah, we're not going to remove the body for rear shocks. That's, yeah. We could. What do you think, Jose? Should we do that? No. Jose says no, so we're good. This is done. Basically, this side, we have nothing else to do here. We're gonna quickly rinse and repeat on the other side. Then we'll show you the next thing that popped up on this truck. And that seems to be a few things that popped up with this truck now. This is kind of the, I don't want to call it this, but it is the midlife crisis of every Lexus. At some point, shocks will go and other stuff will start going. Once you replace them and take care of them, then we go back to reliable driving. So guys, we're all done with the shocks, but I want to show you one thing. You see this little shield? It's a little bit hard to see it on the new one, but I'll show you on the old one here. See this shield that is all coming apart? This, you will see it on a lot of Toyota shocks and Lexus shocks. This always faces the front of the car. This is kind of a, in case this gets hit, this protects it. That's what it's there for. You'll see it on a lot of shocks, like RAV4s will have it, RXs will have it, many other models. When you see this, this faces the front of the car, not towards the back. And with this job done, let us give Jose some few more bad news. What do you say, Jose? He says yes. Yeah. So the rear brakes are very, very close. We're like at 4 millimeters ish on the inner pad, 3-4 millimeters. So Jose, you will need rear brakes pretty soon. Sorry, bud. And then otherwise, everything looks good here. And then we have, I don't think this is a leak. I think this is just grease being flung from here and then eventually melting with time. But we're gonna have to clean that and verify, because we've been seeing kind of a surge of transfer case seal between the trans and the transfer case leaking on these and the Forerunners. So we're going to want to look into that, Mr. Jose. And Jose got tires. Cross Climate 2s. Are these 2s? They are, I think. These are pretty cool. Yeah, Cross Climate 2. I almost got these for my 600,000 mile Lexus, but they were a little too noisy in that car. I wanted it to be really quiet. But these are pretty cool tires. You can kind of, winter tires you can drive all year long. Pretty cool. And then there is one more thing that we discovered. If you come all the way around and kind of look straight up here, there is a little bit of a pink trail. And try to light it up a little bit. There it is. A little bit of a pink trail. If you follow it all the way up, the water pump's leaking. It's very difficult to show you from here, but if you chase it all the way down to the water pump's starting to leak. So that's another thing. Let's look at the front brakes. Ooh, front brakes are getting close too. So you're gonna need brakes all around. Sorry, Jose. Let's check them bearings. Don't have any play here. These bearings love to go on these, and sometimes you'll have play on these bearings and they'll be quiet, and that's the scary part. The front shocks, we actually replaced them a while back, so shocks and mounts, so now you have new shocks all around. Sorry, front struts, keep mixing the two. These are struts, folks. When you see the spring sitting on the shock itself, these are struts. And let's go look at the back real quick so you can see the difference between the two terms. This is just the shock alone, and the spring is right here. Now this one has air suspension, but the spring is separate from it, doesn't sit on it. That's the difference between the words strut and shock. The struts still have a shock in it, but it's the whole assembly where the spring sits on it. That's why they call it a strut. But this job is done. We're gonna put the wheels on, lower it down, and we're gonna turn on the air suspension once more. I'll show you a little demonstration of that once more. Whenever you lift these trucks with the rear air suspension, you wanna put it in off. If you have a Land Cruiser with like hydraulic suspension, some of them will have an off button as well. You also wanna shut it off. So basically, you have the car running, put off, you'll see that off message, then you're gonna shut off the car. Next time you start, it'll still be off. Basically, that tells the computer, ignore any changes. We're not going to make any changes. We're just going to stop doing anything. And that's usually their service mode. It's used in other situations, but that's what that means. Folks, these shocks are way too expensive. $800 each to replace these. And that's not even adding labor. That's just the part itself. Unfortunately, with the GX, with this specific GX and any GX that has air suspension, you can't get them after. There are some aftermarket companies that are starting to work, but you won't have the adjustability anymore. Basically, they won't have the wire, they won't have anything. They'll work, but if you want to retain all those features, you have to buy these. Some of these shocks, I mean, you go look at a Sienna or whatnot, they're like 50 to 80 bucks each, original, and sometimes aftermarket ones are more expensive. But in the case of the GX460, they're very expensive. That's a lot of money for what they are. I mean, it's basically a regular shock with a little actuator inside that changes the firmness. But you want to keep things good, you want to keep things original. Unfortunately, that's the price to pay in this case. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.